My name is Mara Evans, and this is the story I never wanted to tell. It is not a story of fairy tale endings or gentle kindness, but of a life split by grief and forged in the fires of anger and cold survival. I suppose I always knew my childhood was different from the ones I saw in storybooks. Even as a small girl, I could sense that the world inside our gray, weather-beaten house was somehow wrong-heavy with secrets and silence, surrounded by forests that always seemed to lean in, as if listening to the whispered arguments that filled our halls at night. We lived on the outskirts of Brindlewood, a little American town that most people have never heard of, lost somewhere in the endless stretch of upstate New York. Winters there felt twice as long as anywhere else, and the rain seemed to pour straight out of the Canadian sky, drumming against our windows and seeping into my dreams. Our house sat high on the hill, its peeling white paint and wild garden marking it as a place where children did not play. People in town called it the Evans house, or sometimes, that place up the hill. They would cross the street when they saw my father coming, but they always smiled at my mother. She was my safe place, her arms the only place I ever truly felt warm. My mother's name was Evelyn. I remember her singing softly in the kitchen, the way she would brush my hair and press a gentle kiss to my forehead. Her laughter was light, almost fragile, but when she smiled at me, it was as if the whole world was full of promise. My father, Charles Evans, was the opposite in every way, tall, sharp-eyed, his voice always clipped and cold. He wore his pride like a cloak, and seemed to love nothing more than the numbers in his ledger or the sight of new money stacking up in his safe. He worked at the old lumber mill and owned several properties in town, and although people said he was a pillar of Brindlewood, they never spoke those words with much warmth. The night my mother died, everything changed. I was just 11 years old, but I remember every detail with perfect clarity, as if the shadows of that night have been burned into my mind. It was raining hard enough to drown out the sound of voices, but not enough to hide the raised, desperate edge of my father's. I heard a crash, a scream, and then nothing but the relentless drumming of rain. I found my mother at the foot of the stairs, her eyes wide and unseeing. My father called the doctor, but I could see the truth in his face before anyone said a word. After her funeral, the house grew cold and silent. My father shut himself in his study, leaving me to wander the empty rooms. He blamed me for everything: her death, his loneliness, his rage that simmered just beneath the surface. At first I tried to please him. I cleaned the house, I made my meals, and I finished my schoolwork without being asked. But nothing was ever enough. He would glance at me with something like disgust, muttering under his breath that I was just like her. I didn't know what he meant, but the words stung more than any slap. It wasn't long before the rest of the town began to talk. Brindlewood was a place where secrets never stayed hidden for long, but no one dared to say anything to my face. At the market, women would stop their conversations when I passed by. At school, I heard whispers and felt eyes on me in the hallways. I became a ghost in my own life, present but never truly seen. Then, one morning in March, everything changed for good. The cold bit at my cheeks as I woke to the sound of my father's footsteps pounding up the stairs. He burst into my room with a look I'd never seen before, something wild and final. He told me I was cursed, that I had brought ruin upon our house, and that he couldn't bear to look at me another day. Before I could even beg or protest, he shoved a few dollar bills into my hand, grabbed my thin coat from the hook, and pushed me out the front door. I stood on the porch, shivering, as the door slammed shut behind me. I heard the lock turn, the sound echoing through the empty street below. It was as if the world itself had decided to close its heart against me. I remember staring at the front windows, half expecting my mother's face to appear, to beckon me back inside. But there was nothing, just the reflection of a lost girl in a dirty glass. With nowhere to go, I walked down the long gravel driveway, the trees overhead bare and black against the sky. My feet ached, and the wind cut straight through my coat, but I kept walking, down past the edge of Brindlewood, past the tiny shops and quiet houses, until I reached the city of Buffalo. I had no plan, only a fierce, growing determination not to give my father the satisfaction of breaking me. If he had cast me out, I would prove I could survive without him. Buffalo was a city of hard faces and quick hands. I slept in alleys and parks, sometimes hiding in abandoned buildings when the nights grew too cold. I learned quickly that trust was a dangerous thing, and that people would steal from you for a handful of dollars or a warm coat. Hunger became a familiar ache in my belly, but I refused to give in. Some nights I found kindness, a woman named Ruth, who ran a soup kitchen on Main Street, or the old man at the train station who handed me a sandwich and told me to keep my chin up. Most nights, though, were just me and the city lights, watching the world rush past while I curled up in a doorway. I wandered for years, sometimes sneaking onto trains heading as far as Chicago or Boston, following rumors of jobs or shelter. I cleaned dishes in diners, swept floors in old hotels, and did anything I could to earn a little money. Every dollar I made felt like a small victory, a step away from the house on the hill, from my father's shadow. It was a world of danger and uncertainty, but somewhere along the way, I promised myself one thing: I would never be weak again. Every night I spent alone, every meal I earned with my own hands, I grew stronger. The girl who had been cast out into the rain was gone. In her place was someone who would never beg for love, who would never let anyone else decide her worth. I didn't know where my journey would lead, but I knew I would find my way no matter how long it took, or how dark the road ahead might be. The years that followed my exile from Brindlewood were nothing like the stories of lost children finding their way home. My story was grittier, built not on luck or kindness, but on raw determination and the stubborn belief that I could build a life worth living, even if I had to do it alone. I drifted through the streets of Buffalo and then beyond, always looking for the next place that might let me rest for a little while. Sometimes it was a church basement, a stranger's garage, just the space behind a dumpster with enough cardboard to keep the wind away. I learned early that nothing in this world was free except maybe the stars above, and even they seemed distant most nights. By the time I was 16, I knew how to read people like open books. I could spot the liars, the hustlers, the ones who smiled with their lips but not their eyes. But I also met a few rare souls who didn't want anything from me, who offered help simply because they could. One of them was Anna Walsh, a middle-aged woman from Cleveland with silver streaks in her hair and a diner that smelled like fresh coffee and cinnamon. I wandered into her place one icy morning, shivering and hungry, and she handed me a mug of hot chocolate without a word. After I ate, she offered me a job sweeping the floor, washing dishes, bussing tables for tips. It wasn't much, but it was honest work and it was warm. Anna taught me more than just how to balance plates or count out the register. She taught me how to save, how to trust a little, and how to see opportunity where others saw ruin. "Never let a bad day convince you it's a bad life," she would say, patting my hand as we closed up at night. I tucked away her advice, along with the small but growing pile of dollars I stashed under my mattress at the boarding house. Of course, not everyone was like Anna. For every person who helped, there seemed to be two more ready to take. I met men like Victor, laying in Detroit, a slick-talking charmer who promised me a job and then tried to make off with my last $20. I confronted him on the street, right in front of a line of honking taxis, and took my money back. I learned to keep my back to the wall and my wits sharp. These years toughened me, but they also sharpened my hunger for more than just survival. When I turned 18, I left Cleveland for Philadelphia, a city whose skyline promised new beginnings. I found a job as a night janitor in a rundown office building, cleaning up after men and women who made 100 times what I did. I watched them come and go in their expensive suits, overheard pieces of conversations about investments and opportunities. It was there, alone one night with a mop and bucket, that I realized something. The world belonged to those who saw what others ignored. I started reading everything I could get my hands on: business magazines, old books left in the break room, articles about real estate and banking. One day, during my lunch break, I passed a crumbling brick building with a faded "for sale" sign in the window. It was nothing special to most people, a relic with shattered windows and a leaky roof, but to me, it looked like a door. I called the realtor from the payphone at the corner. The price was $30,000, a fortune to me, but hardly anything in the city's booming market. I didn't have the money, but I had something else: a plan and a stubborn streak. I convinced a small neighborhood bank to give me a loan, using every scrap of savings I had as a down payment. I promised them I would turn it around, and for reasons I'll never know, the loan officer, a kind-eyed man named Mr. Sutton, decided to take a risk on me. For the next year, I lived inside that building, sleeping on the floor, showering at the gym, and working day and night to fix what was broken. I learned to patch walls, lay tile, paint ceilings, and negotiate with contractors. When I finally finished, I sold it for 3 times what I paid. That first taste of victory was sweeter than anything I had ever known. I paid off my loan, bought 2 more fixer-uppers, and started the process all over again. Success didn't come all at once. There were months when I had to borrow from friends or work 2 jobs just to cover a mortgage. Some deals fell through, contractors who disappeared with my money, and endless paperwork that seemed designed to trip me up. But every time I stumbled, I remembered the night my father locked me out, and the promise I made to myself in the freezing dark. I would never be weak again. As the years passed, my empire grew. I learned to spot undervalued properties from a block away. I made connections with lawyers, bankers, builders, men, and women from every walk of life, each with dreams of their own. Some tried to cheat me, but most respected me for my tenacity. I bought my first commercial building at 22, a tired old storefront near the university. By 24, I owned a half-dozen rental properties in 3 different cities. I kept moving New York, Boston, even London across the Atlantic, always chasing the next big opportunity. Before I knew it, I was appearing in business magazines, my name listed alongside men and women I had once only read about. Self-made billionaire, Mara Evans redefines urban renewal, one headline read. They quoted numbers: $3.2 billion net worth, hundreds of employees and properties across the country. They talked about my sharp instincts, my fearless decisions, my knack for transforming ruins into riches. But no one knew about the nights I had gone hungry, or the way I still jumped at sudden noises, or the scar I carried inside from the night my childhood ended. People assumed money could erase the past, but they were wrong. All the dollars in America couldn't wipe away the image of my mother's pale face, the echo of my father's last words, the sense of being an outsider in every room. As I stood in my high-rise office overlooking Central Park, I realized I had everything I'd ever dreamed of except peace. The empty spot inside me ached with every new success. That's when I knew it was time to go back. The idea took root quietly, like a seed sprouting in darkness. I didn't want revenge at first. I just wanted to see the old house on the hill, to face the place where my nightmares began and prove to myself that I was no longer that frightened, unwanted child. But as I began making plans to return to Brindlewood, I felt something else rising in me, a cold, sharp sense of purpose, and the realization that maybe, just maybe, the past wasn't finished with me yet. When I finally returned to Brindlewood, the town was almost exactly as I remembered, quiet, brooding, a place caught somewhere between the past and the present. The air still smelled like wet earth and distant pine, and the sky seemed always heavy with rain. Nobody recognized me. In truth, I hardly recognized myself as I stepped out of my black car onto Main Street, dressed in a tailored coat and boots that cost more than my father used to make in a month. I could have been any stranger from any city, and that anonymity suited me perfectly. Brindlewood was smaller than I remembered, its corners more frayed, its buildings older. The grocery store, the bakery, the gas station on the corner, all of them were struggling, patched together with hope and leftover paint. With the kind of money I now possessed, it took only a few phone calls, a handful of signatures, and some quiet, careful negotiations to buy up nearly every property in town. I became the silent owner of Brindlewood, but no one knew the name behind the companies on the paperwork. There was something satisfying in the power, but it wasn't enough. My real prize was still waiting. The old Evans mansion stood at the top of the hill, half hidden by gnarled trees and years of neglect. I drove up the long winding drive on a gray afternoon, stepping out into the overgrown grass and staring at the house where my childhood ended. Its windows were dark, its roof sagging in places, the porch warped by years of winter storms. But beneath the dust and decay, I could see the bones of what it once was, a place of secrets and shadows, haunted by the memories I carried with me every day. I did not buy the mansion to restore it to its former beauty. No, I had something else in mind, something far more elaborate. I wanted to remake the house into a living, breathing memory, a maze of ghosts and secrets, every room a chapter of the story my father tried to erase. I wanted him to walk the same halls and feel the same terror he had given me. This was not forgiveness or healing. This was justice, written in brick and timber, mirror and sound. I hired teams from across America and Europe, architects from Paris, designers from London, sound engineers from New York. I paid them more than they'd ever dreamed to bring my vision to life, demanding secrecy and perfection in every detail. We stripped the mansion down to its bones, gutting the walls, rewiring the halls, building hidden doors and twisting corridors. Each room became a set piece in a grand, terrible play. Hidden speakers were installed behind the walls, programmed to whisper my father's voice, his cruel words from my childhood, his angry shouts, his muttered curses. They would echo in the silence, soft as breath, making the hair rise on the back of your neck. We placed old mirrors everywhere, the kind that warped reflections just enough to be unsettling. Some were fitted with screens that could flicker with the faces of people long gone, my mother, pale and sad, or myself as a frightened child. We chilled the house deliberately. Vents in the floor blew icy drafts up through the halls. In some rooms, the wallpaper peeled in patterns like reaching hands, and the ceiling creaked at night as if someone was always walking overhead. I filled the library with the books my mother loved, but every spine was blank, every page empty except for one, which bore her name and the date of her death. In the kitchen, the scent of her perfume drifted through the air, sweet and ghostly, impossible to ignore. Some rooms I left almost untouched, covered in dust, just as I'd last seen them. Others were redesigned as twisted versions of the past my childhood bedroom, the bed still small and cold, my old coat hanging on the back of the door. I placed photographs along the hallways, black and white images of moments my father thought forgotten, my mother laughing, me playing in the yard, the three of us together in the rare days before everything fell apart. In every photo, the smiles looked strained, the shadows deeper than they should have been. For months, the house was a construction site by day and a haunted dream by night. The workers muttered about strange noises and flickering lights, about the sense of being watched. Some refused to come back after dark. I didn't blame them. The mansion was becoming exactly what I wanted, a place where the past could never be buried, only relived again and again. Finally, when everything was finished, I set my plan in motion. I sent my father an invitation delivered by hand, signed with my full name. I told him the Avens house was to be opened again, that his presence was required to reclaim what was rightfully his. I wanted him curious, off guard, hungry for what he thought was owed to him. And, as I expected, he came. He arrived on a night when thunder rolled over the hills and rain hammered the roof. The kind of storm that always seemed to find Brindlewood when something was about to happen. I watched him from the shadows as he stepped out of a battered old car. His hair thinner, his frame smaller than I remembered, but his eyes just as sharp and cold. He wore a suit that had seen better days and carried himself like a man used to getting his way. Inside, I greeted him with polite words, masking the storm inside me. He looked at me with surprise, suspicion flickering in his gaze, but he said nothing about the years apart or the silence between us. I led him through the front doors, closing them quietly behind us. As soon as he crossed the threshold, I pressed a button in my pocket. The lock slid into place with a heavy final sound, echoing through the halls. He turned to look at me, confusion and anger twisting his features. I said nothing. Instead, I disappeared into the shadows, leaving him alone in the mansion I had built out of nightmares. The show was about to begin. All through the house, the lights flickered, casting strange, jumping shadows on the walls. The voices started soft at first, then louder. He wandered from room to room, calling my name, demanding to know what was happening. But the mansion only answered with his own words from years ago, thrown back at him in whispers and shouts. Every mirror he passed showed a face he did not want to see, my mother's, pale and tearful, or his own, aging and drawn. The cold seeped into his bones. The secrets he had buried clawed their way back into the light. The house itself seemed to pulse with memory and grief, never letting him rest, never letting him forget. And I, unseen, watched from the shadows, knowing that the final act was yet to come. The storm outside raged on, wind shaking the ancient windows and rain battering the roof, as if the sky itself wanted to witness what would unfold inside the Evans mansion that night. I watched my father, Charles Evans, moved through the halls, his footsteps uneven, his voice echoing off the walls that once witnessed my childhood fears. He called my name again and again, the sound growing raw, but I remained hidden, letting the house tell its story. With each step he took, the maze of memories closed in around him. The doors he tried would not budge, and every window he reached for showed nothing but the storm and his reflection, drawn, pale, and older than he wanted to admit. The voices followed him wherever he went, whispers at first, then clear and sharp, reminding him of words he'd spoken in anger, of threats and accusations he'd hurled in rooms that should have been safe. In the dim light, every mirror became a portal into the past. He would glance up, startled by movement, and see not his face, but my mother's, her fearful eyes, her bruised cheek, the trembling hands she used to hide from him and from me. Sometimes he saw me as a little girl, clutching my coat in the cold, wide-eyed with confusion and dread. The images flickered in and out, sometimes overlapping, always distorted by grief and guilt. He tried to run, as if escape might be possible, but the house was now a living labyrinth. Each hallway seemed to curve back on itself, leading him again and again to the same doors, the same rooms. The kitchen, where my mother used to hum while she cooked, was now filled with the sound of breaking glass and shouted accusations. The library, lined with empty books, now whispered lost lullabies and the soft rustle of tears. In the parlor, the scent of my mother's perfume lingered in the air, bittersweet and impossible to ignore. I watched from hidden corners, my breath steady, my resolve hardening with every hour that passed. This was not cruelty. It was a reckoning. For the first time in his life, my father could not turn away from what he had done or bury it beneath a mountain of dollars and excuses. The house would not let him forget. As the night wore on, exhaustion and fear began to break through his anger. I saw his bravado crumble, replaced by something I had never seen in him before: uncertainty. His hands shook as he reached for the banister, steadying himself, his head bowed. He began to talk to himself, muttering apologies to shadows, arguing with ghosts only he could see. Then, in the heart of the storm, he found his way into the grand hall, the same room where my childhood had unraveled so many years ago. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the massive mirror that dominated one wall. This was where it all began, and where it would end? My father staggered to the center of the room, the floorboards groaning beneath his weight. In the reflection, he saw the truth laid bare, my mother standing behind him, her eyes filled with sorrow and accusation. I, beside her, smaller but no longer powerless. The scene replayed in agonizing detail the night my mother tried to run. The argument that ended in her fatal fall down the stairs, the lies my father had told to keep the world from knowing the truth. It was all there, impossible to deny. For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. His knees gave way, and he collapsed before the mirror, clutching his head in his hands. His voice, once so commanding, broke as he began to confess, not just to me, but to the empty house, to the memories, to the ghosts that had taken root in every corner. He spoke of his anger, his jealousy, the control he wielded over my mother, until there was nothing left of her but fear. He confessed to blaming me because it was easier than facing his guilt, to locking me out. After all, I reminded him of the things he could never fix. The words poured out of him, raw and desperate. He wept not the angry tears of a man denied, but the hopeless, broken sobs of someone who has finally seen himself for what he is. Every admission echoed off the empty walls, bouncing back at him, making it impossible to hide. I let him finish, watched as his pride finally shattered, leaving him hollow and alone. When he could cry no more, I stepped out from the shadows. For a long moment, we simply stared at each other, the storm raging outside, the house silent inside. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as the child he blamed or the enemy he despised, but as a woman who had survived everything he'd done. Without a word, I crossed the hall and unlocked the great front doors. The storm wind burst in, carrying the smell of rain and freedom. I looked at my father, broken and trembling on the floor, and felt nothing but relief. I had carried the weight of his cruelty and my mother's death for too long. Now I set it down. I walked out into the night, the cold rain washing over me, mixing with tears I hadn't realized were falling. Behind me, the mansion loomed on the hill, a monument to secrets and pain, but also to the truth that can never stay hidden. My father was left alone, a prisoner of his guilt and the memories he could never escape. The people of Brindlewood still whisper about the mansion on the hill, saying it's cursed, haunted by ghosts and old sins. No one dares go near it after dark, and even during the day, children hurry past its gate. But I know what truly lives there, not just the pain of the past, but the freedom that comes with facing it. As I walked down the hill into the storm, I felt lighter than I ever had before. I was no longer a child of shadows. I was Mara Evans, a woman who had claimed her power, her truth, and her revenge, not just in dollars but in courage. I was free, at last, to write my own story.